With week 3 of the June Joust concluding during this knockout stage, we saw some crazy games this weekend and a lot that surprised us. So Brett and I are here to break that all down on this episode of Overwatch Database. So for the first game we're going to talk about New York versus Hangzhou. And Brett's going to start us off with the East Region games here.
Yeah, so over the weekend, we saw not a lot of shocking results. I think there was one game in each region where we saw a big upset. And that game over in APAC was New York versus Hangzhou. That was very shocking. I predicted, I think, Hangzhou 3-0 to win that game. And New York came out and won it 3-1 and booked their ticket to Hawaii. I think New York's definitely far and away the most, surprising team we've seen make it to Hawaii so far this year, albeit only 2 stages. And then in the second knockout game over in APAC, we saw the Shanghai Dragons beat the Seoul Dynasty 3-0. I was a little surprised, again, at how much of a beatdown that was. I think we'd actually seen pretty good things out of Seoul. They started running 2U on off-tank, and I thought, really fielding their best roster, and Shanghai kind of came out and just clapped them. And that was really surprising. So over on the east side of things, we have New York and Shanghai as the 2 representatives going to Hawaii. And then who do we have over in the NA side of things, Connor?
And on the west side, we had a rematch of the Dallas Fuel versus the Houston Outlaws. And I was rooting for the Outlaws, as normal as I do here. But oh my god, Fuel 3-0'd the Outlaws. And that was something I really didn't want to happen. That was horrible. And then we have Rain versus Uprising, where Rain 3-0'd Uprising. And yeah, well, that was... what do you think was going to happen from that, Brett? I just want to get your quick take on that really quick.
I expected that.
You expected that? Okay. I
thought there was a
Boston would get
world
1 point at least, or one map.
Yeah, I thought there was a world where Boston could make that a game, but I wasn't really surprised Atlanta won so easily. Now back to the first game, that was surprising. I thought Houston and Dallas would be a map 5 game for sure.
Yeah, during that game, they seemed to actually adapt to the enemy team way faster than they did previously, and I think that's what really helped them there. All right, and then the next game, since Outlaws were knocked out there, we had Fuel versus Gladiators. And that was actually the only game that didn't go 3-0 this weekend. Fuel got 3, and Gladiators got 1. And I'm surprised they actually took a map, because what happened with Outlaws, it is the Gladiators, though, so I'll give them that. But the Outlaws were actually looking way better than the Gladiators. Not way better, but at least a little bit better this season than Gladiators, so I'm surprised they actually took a map off of Fuel.
Overall in the season, I think the Gladiators looked better in this stage.
That was... Yes, okay, I'll give you that, yeah.
Yeah, that was
probably... These weird comps being run, and it's kind of boring to watch. You had the Moira Lucio, Echo Reaper, Diva Winston. So boring to watch.
I definitely I agree, I don't find that meta very fun to watch. I do like it when it's played with Ashe. We saw Atlanta play a lot of Ashe. They were playing Kai on that. And then in APAC, I think a whole ton of Ashe was being played with it. In fact, they weren't even running the Moira Lucio a lot. They were running Brig and other stuff. So I think if you run a mix of Brig and Ashe with it, it's a little more fun to watch. But yeah, when it's straight up Echo Reaper, Diva, Orisa, or Winston or whatever, and then Moira Lucio, it's pretty boring. But I thought the 3-1, win for the Fuel over the Gladiators was pretty surprising. I picked Fuel to win, but I thought the Gladiators would give them a little bit more of a run for their money.
Right, yeah, that makes sense. And then the final game, this is what really had us on edge for this. Rain 3-0 the Shock. What is going on with the Shock this season?
They giga boomed.
They giga boomed. Okay. I think the most nail-biting map we saw during that was the overtime on Hollywood. Oh my god, Kai was going off on Ashe. He was unstoppable.
And Pelican on Echo.
And then Pelican on Echo, exactly.
That was the single best map, of any Echo being played I've seen all season long. That was an absolute incredible performance. And it was by a rookie of all, people.
But the thing is, these rookies don't completely look like rookies. Because they've been in contenders. So they've had that. They probably started Open Division, then went contenders, and then League. So they've been playing the game a long time, got a lot of experience in it. So it's not like they're coming out of nowhere, And so I really don't think the word rookie and I guess newbie kind of go hand in hand here, because it's completely different in this sense.
So yeah, I think, the Shock not making Hawaii again was probably the most surprising result from the weekend, especially because they had a bye and all that, so they only had to win 1 game. So just kind of looking at it overall, the New York Excelsior, the Shanghai Dragons, the Atlanta Reign, and the Dallas Fuel will be the 4 teams in Hawaii. And the matchups we have are actually pretty interesting, I think. For starters, it'll be double elimination. The first game is the NYXL versus Atlanta Reign, and the second one will be Shanghai versus Dallas. And we're going to jump into that here in a little bit later, when we do our pick'em segment, we're actually going to do our predictions for the bracket in Hawaii next week. But before we do that, we're going to talk about a few other things. So our first topic we're going to talk about here is Houston. And I want to talk about them for a few minutes because they're quite an interesting team. And there's a lot of, I think, mixed feelings about them in the community, whether they're an elite team or not. So when you look at Houston overall on the season, they have a 7-1 record, right? Tied for the best record in the league, regular season wise. I think the big issue people have with them is they haven't made it to Hawaii despite posting, great stages twice in a row. Well, I think we need to look at Houston from the perspective of they are an elite, top team, a championship titled, contending team. Because, really, when you look at it and, who they've played in knockouts, they've had the tougher side of the bracket both times. And both times they've been in the knockouts, they've ran into Dallas. Okay. Dallas has played their best Overwatch of the season, both stages, in knockouts. So I think you can kind of give Houston a bit of a pass there when they're losing to literally the best team in the league playing their best at that time. You know what I mean? So overall, I kind of want to quash this thing that Houston is not an elite team. They are. If they literally, I know you got to beat the best to be the best and all that, and that's a perfectly fair thing. But Dallas is also the best team in the Overwatch League. So I really think if Houston can just get into knockouts and not have to play Dallas, they have a really good shot to get to Hawaii next stage.
So following up on the whole elite team versus not elite team, I think they are, but just not in this stage. Because during the main melee, they were kicking ass basically, and then when this whole meta change came in, they were kind of thrown for a loop. Something I did not like that they did last week was play Dreamer on Orisa when they didn't need an Orisa comp. He just got destroyed, and then Dallas pushed in, and then they lost.
Well, and I think also the fact that it didn't work, and they just kept doing it.
Yeah, and the funny thing is that the thing I find funny from last week is after Houston lost that point on Hanamura running an Orisa comp, 2 more teams, same exact map, same point, running an Orisa comp. Did they not learn what happened with Houston? They tried to make it work. I mean,
you know what Houston is? Houston is the new Philadelphia. So Philadelphia's issue for the past 3 years in Overwatch League has been they get to big moments. They get to stage finals. They played, Philadelphia played in the championship in season 1. They never can win them. They do not have a single stage title, championship, anything to their name. And I believe it's either them or the Shock. I'm not sure which, but they either have the first or second best regular season record if you add up all the seasons of any team. So they're having incredible success. They cannot win a tournament or a stage or anything, and that's kind of what Houston feels like right now because they're having a great regular season. This year they get to knockouts. In the May Melee they lose. They get to knockouts in the June Joust, they lose. So Houston really feels like the new Philadelphia. And I'm really hoping that's not the case and they can kind of break that next stage. But I really don't feel 100% confident about it.
Honestly, I really don't feel confident that they'll make it either. But, you got to give them some sort of benefit of that, because they're playing really well. Except for, that Orisa comp they ran, like I just said, that really pissed me off. But other than that, they've been pretty constant in their play styles and everything, not switching up stuff too often. I'm surprised that they didn't do as well as they could have in the May Melee. I get June Joust because a lot of teams were thrown for a loop with the whole meta changes with 4 heroes being banned. But I'm really surprised that they didn't do honestly completely worse in June Joust than they did May Melee. It was about the same, to be honest, and maybe they'll pick it up.
I thought they would be much worse this stage, and they weren't. Yeah. Well, they can play Jengu next stage, and I think that'll help. He can go back to playing Reinhardt. So shifting gears to the Philadelphia Fusion, I want to talk about them. I think we would really be talking a little differently about them if they hadn't have just lost one map to the Valiant. They ended up winning that game 3-1, but that game knocked the Philadelphia Fusion out of knockouts, and that's what gave New York the spot. But I don't want, people who are Philadelphia fans or even just, viewers of the league who aren't to feel too down about Philadelphia. First of all, they're still 6-2 despite missing so much of their roster, and they're going to have help on the way. So this was just announced, I think at the time of this airing about a week ago, maybe more like 5 days ago. But FunnyAstro was able to obtain his visa and I believe is now already has joined Philly in Korea. So that's really exciting for this team. Anybody who watched Overwatch League last year knows how good FunnyAstro was. Look, I like Toby. Toby's Lucio is great and all, but FunnyAstro was just on another level. and on multiple heroes besides just Lucio too. So that's a really big thing for Philadelphia, I think, getting him back. And honestly, they have EQO. I think EQO, Carpe, Rascal at DPS is enough, even without Shockwave being able to be there right now, is enough for them to be a true contender. I think Mono and Hotba is good enough, and then their support line is now going to get a big boom with FunnyAstro joining. So all in all, I think there's a lot to really look forward to from this team. And in stage 3, we're not going to have hero bans. They can go back to playing Rhine and a lot of the comps that worked for them in stage 1. And I really think we're going to be talking about Philadelphia Fusion. I mean, I really believe this is a championship roster and championship coaching. I really hope they prove me right. Otherwise, I'm going to look like an idiot here because I'm really talking them up. But I can't, overstate, I think, how important FunnyAstro joining this team now is. In more player-related news, another Shanghai Dragons bench player retires. So we had, a couple weeks ago, Erster retired, kind of out of nowhere and surprised everybody. Well, Diem, their hit scan, has now retired as well. He didn't list an issue. I think he said personal reasons, so I guess technically he did, but we really don't know what the personal reasons are. If I had a guess, I mean, I don't think he's even played this year. I think that riding the bench, for an Overwatch League team probably really sucks. You're putting in, 8-10 hours of practice every day, and then you're never getting to play. And I'm not saying that was what drove him to retire, but at least I think that can definitely be a factor for a lot of these people. But also more than that, it's just going to be, sad to see Diem go. He's been around in the Overwatch League scene for a really, really long time, many years. He's had a lot of great moments in the league. And I think he's always been, especially even with him, on the bench and haven't played in quite a while, I think he's always been really a fan favorite player. He's just kind of a classic, player, in my opinion. They also did pick up Who Are You, who obviously is not a hit scan. So it's going to be interesting to kind of see how their roster rolls, because they won't have DM. It'll just be Fleta, Lip, and Who Are You as of right now. They might pick up another player. I don't know. But it's going to be definitely kind of interesting to see how this goes moving forward. Another team we're going to talk about is the Florida Mayhem. If you've been, following our channel, watching our power rankings, our weekly recaps consistently since, when we started these at the beginning of the season, I'm a Florida simp. I'm not technically a Florida fan, but I probably might as well be at this point. I really love this Florida Mayhem roster, but it's getting a little concerning. It feels like the losses are really starting to mount for this team. I think this is a team that should not be 4-4. This is a team and roster that should be, having championship aspirations. They have a really good coach. Kuki is a fantastic coach. They have a really good general manager, and they have a really, really good roster. You're not going to get better, at the DPS line than Yaki and PQB. Like, it's phenomenal. You could make an argument that they're, easily one of the best. I think they're one of the top 3 DPS duos in the entire league. I think OG has been mediocre. I know everybody's talked about he's had such a big resurgence this year. I wouldn't say that. I think if you put him on a bad team, I think he would look really bad. I don't think he's been that amazing, but he fits well with the team, and he's played well because he has a good roster around him. And then Gargoyles, for a few years now, been a great off tank. And then Slime and Gongnonjin are really good support players. So really, this roster is so talented, and it is just really concerning with the amount of losses there. Now, granted, they had an insanely tough June Joust schedule, and that's why in our power rankings I only knocked them down to 10. Because I think outside of London, their other 3 games were all against like super top, like 4 teams in the entire league. I know they had to play the Washington Justice, who have looked so much better, at the end of this stage, and they had to play the Dallas Fuel. So, and they were very competitive in all those games. But I think the problem here is at some point in all these games you're being competitive in and losing, you got to start, getting some wins out of these. And so my question kind of for the viewers and to you, Connor, is with a team with such a good coaching staff, general manager, and roster, but having a 4-4 record, is it too soon to worry?
There's a few teams we see 4-4 right now. We have the Reign, we have Defiant, and obviously Mayhem because we're talking about that right now. So there's 3 teams we have 4-4, and we've seen how Reign's been playing, we've seen how Mayhem's been playing, we've seen Defiant, we've seen them all. And the thing is, a lot of teams just got thrown for a loop, like I said, during the June Joust stage. And I really think we should give them another stage to come to any conclusions or whatnot, because they played fine in the main melee, so did a number of other teams. And then June Joust comes around and fall down. But then, next stage, they might come back up. And we've seen other teams who were worse in May Melee, better in June Joust. But those were the ones that ran the kind of off comps that you don't really see, But all in all, I do think we should wait another stage before coming to any conclusions about Mayhem.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I just think it is concerning. I think it's a roster that should be, good enough to win a championship. So just being 4-4, cause I know Atlanta's 4-4 and they look really good, but I think over the course of a whole season, Florida should be better than Atlanta. So look, actually, I'm looking at their schedule for next stage. They actually play Toronto and Boston in the first week next stage. So they should win both of those games in theory. And then the following week, they play the Dallas Fuel again and the Washington Justice. So I think that for Florida, two of those games are really winnable. Two of them are really tough. So I think for Florida to kind of prove to people that they still are an elite team, just go 3-1, okay? If you can win the two, you should win, and then win one of those two, really tough ones against Washington and, Dallas. I think that's kind of enough to get your season back on track. Yeah, you're looking at a 7-5 record. Maybe you'd like to, be a little better than that. But I think if you can have that record and get past knockouts and make it to Hawaii again, because remember, they got a league point in Hawaii and then they melee. So if they can get to their, again, even being 7-5, I think that they can kind of get their season rolling better and have, a better place in the standings. So our last topic before we get into our brackets, me and Connor have our predictions for the June Joust tournament in Hawaii. I want to talk about the Washington Justice. So they, in the first week of the June Joust, lost 2 games, 3-0 to Boston and Paris. I was one of the highest people on the Justice coming into the year. Like, their roster looked incredible. I didn't think Bebe and Closer were as bad as supports as people thought, and I still don't. But that was really eye-opening, losing, those 2 games. And then they come back this week, and they roll Florida 3-0. I think, obviously, very highly of Florida. And then they took the shock to them at 5. So I think kind of what we're seeing with the Justice is they are slow to adapt to the meta. We saw that in Stage 1. They had a really easy schedule, to be honest with you. And I think that was really what fueled their 4-0 start, because they didn't look really that good doing it. I mean, teams like Vancouver were taking maps off them. And then in this stage, we see them go, 1-3, playing tougher teams. But we saw once they figured the meta out, they looked darn near unbeatable. They looked immensely good. So I think for the Justice, if they can figure the meta out quicker and adjust quicker, this is a team that can be the best team in the entire league. I know a lot of people are really down on them right now, and that's, justifiably so. They're 5-3, and they have basically a super roster almost. I mean, they should be better than that, but what we are seeing is they are very slow to, come to grips with the meta. But when they do, they look incredible. So I think for the Justice moving forward, they can be the best team, or at least one of the top 3-4 teams in the entire league, if they can just adjust to the meta faster before they're already knocked out of knockouts, like what happened this stage. So for our final segment of our recap is our pick'ems, and we're going to be doing it a little bit different this week because there's not really a traditional set of games this weekend. We obviously have the final 4 teams playing in Hawaii for the June Joust title. So Connor and I are both going to pick our winners of the games and kind of fill out our own bracket of what we think is going to happen. These games are not going to affect our pick'ems record because it's kind of could be all over the place. Like, teams we picked to win or lose might not even make it, that far, and then it just can be a mess. So this is just more of our predictions, I guess, for Hawaii more than anything. And honestly, I'm okay with that because after last week, I'm actually behind in our pick'ems. Connor is now ahead at 16-4, and I am second with 15-5. So speaking of the pick'ems, we actually decided what the loser's going to have to do at the end of the season. So you want to let them know what that is, Connor?
All right, so what we decided on was Torb, hammer only, but you can use a turret. You have to keep playing until you get a hammer kill, and this is going to be in competitive.
That's going to be really exciting because I don't even play Torb regularly, so I'm sure that's going to be a big pain. You know what we should have done is Diva remet kills. That would have been a good one.
I mean, those are pretty easy though, but that would have been fun though.
All right, so getting into our predictions for this weekend, Connor, why don't you start us off?
All right, so for the first game, we have Atlanta versus New York. I picked Atlanta for that one because of how they performed this week, and I don't think I've really seen many New York games. Maybe one, and it was during an encore, so I've only seen 1, maybe 2 games. And the next game is Shanghai versus Dallas. I picked Dallas for that. Again, don't really watch East Region games. Been seeing how Dallas been playing throughout the entire season and throughout this stage. Went with Dallas for that. And so for the winner game, we have Atlanta versus Dallas. That was actually a tough choice for me to pick between because they're both great teams. But I had to go with Atlanta just because of Kai and Pelican. They are just destroying on DPS. So there's that. And the next one after that would be New York versus Shanghai. And I really didn't know what to pick for this, so I just did a complete guess, and I picked Shanghai. So, I mean, there's that. I really don't watch those games, so I picked whatever. And the next one, Dallas versus Shanghai. Picking Dallas only because, again, don't watch East Region games, seeing how Dallas plays, like their style, going with Dallas for that. And the championship game, Dallas versus Atlanta. Again, this was a tough choice again because there was already Dallas versus Atlanta before for the winners game, but I went with Atlanta again. I mean, it was a tough choice. I'm staying with Atlanta though. So, what are your picks on all those games, Brett?
That's interesting. So you have two North American teams in the final, I think that's perfectly reasonable. I think you're selling APAC a little short. So for mine, for the first game, New York versus Atlanta. Atlanta, easy pick. I don't think. I know New York beat Hangzhou. I don't really expect them to beat Atlanta as well. In the second game, Shanghai versus Dallas. It was tough, but I went with Shanghai. I really, as I said in our power rankings, I put them number one. I just think they have the best roster, top to bottom. Going to the winners game, Atlanta versus the Dragons. I actually picked Shanghai again. So yeah, picking Shanghai to beat Dallas and Atlanta might be like a bit of a hot take back to back, And then in the losers bracket, New York versus Dallas. Again, pretty easy Dallas pick. I don't really see New York beating any of these teams because it literally took the Valiant taking a map off Philadelphia for them to even be there in the first place. And in the semifinal game, Atlanta versus Dallas, I picked the Dallas Fuel. I anticipate that to be a heck of a match. If that ends up being the semifinal game, both teams fighting to go to the final, that would be an absolutely incredible game, but I would see personally Dallas coming on top. I mean, it could be 50-50. It could go either way, but I do have a lot of faith in Dallas. And then for the championship, Shanghai versus the Dallas Fuel. I probably sat there for about 5 minutes trying to figure out who I wanted to pick for this game. I really, really like Shanghai a lot, but I'm actually going to go with the Dallas Fuel as repeat champions. I just think that they, when they figure out the meta and are playing their peak game, I think they're the best team in the league, and I think that's exactly what they're doing right now. And once again, I don't really see, anybody beating them. And this is actually a rematch of the May Melee final if this actually ends up happening. But again, I see Dallas coming out on top. And then you had Atlanta, so actually we both have North American teams winning. And that really doesn't surprise me. I think that comp-wise and everything, I think this season as a whole, I think APAC's been a little behind in terms of all of that compared to North America, in my opinion. Outside of maybe Shanghai, but I think Dallas is just that good. So that's all we have for our Week 3 recap. All in all, it was a pretty exciting week of knockouts. I do want to mention real quick, following the conclusion on Saturday of the June Joust tournament, after a winner has been crowned and all that, early next week we will actually have a video. We are going to break down all the games from that and talk about the winner and kind of go over all that. And then also later next week we will have an episode we're going to put out. We're going to talk about who we think the favorite for all like the awards at the end of the season are throughout, the halfway point of the year so far. So we're going to give kind of like our favorite for MVP so far, Coach of the Year, Rookie of the Year, all that stuff. We might throw in a couple like others too. We'll probably take a look at the standings, kind of talk about the playoffs and all that. So those are the two content videos we have planned out right now, kind of in between stages. We may or may not do more. We're not 100% sure on that yet. So thank you guys for watching our June Joust Week 3 recap. Make sure to like and subscribe and leave a comment. Hit the bell icon for notifications. You can also check us out on Apple Podcasts. The link for that is down in the description. As always, enjoy the games this weekend, and we'll see you next week. Thanks for watching.